Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Ukrainian forces have liberated the Kiev suburb of Irpin, according to the country's interior minister. The Kremlin denies a report that Chelsea football club owner Roman Abramovich was poisoned while taking part in peace talks over Ukraine. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council said its contingency measures are well prepared for a possible prolonged unrest of the Taal volcano. And a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry defended Beijing's sovereign rights and the right of jurisdiction over the relevant waters after the Philippine Coast Guard accused its Chinese counterpart of steering one of its ships within meters of a Filipino patrol vessel. First, we go to the latest in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukrainian forces have liberated the Kiev suburb of Irpin, according to the country's interior minister. Saying this in televised remarks, he said, in fact, this is now happening in parallel. The armed forces are advancing, the police are advancing, and immediately a sweep is going on immediately through the streets. Therefore, the city has now been liberated, but it's still dangerous to be there. But fighting appeared to be continuing around the area, with AFP journalists hearing around 20 shell explosions in quick succession by the road leading into Irpin. Western experts describe the loss of Irpin as a significant setback for Russian forces who are still trying to regroup and after a failed first attempt to encircle the capital. It's now more than a month since Russian President Vladimir Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine, hoping to cripple or oust the democratic government in Kiev. Meanwhile, Ukraine said today it had reopened its humanitarian corridors and evacuated civilians from war-scarred regions after a one-day pause over what Kiev called possible Russian provocations. 3 humanitarian corridors were agreed for today, according to Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk in a video statement posted on Telegram a day after announcing their closure, citing intelligence reports. On Monday, the evacuations of civilians was halted after Ukrainian authorities said they had intelligence reports suggesting invading Russian troops were planning attacks on humanitarian routes. And President Biden refusing to walk back his controversial comments that Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. The president said he makes no apologies and that he was only expressing outrage of Putin but not calling for a regime change. Take a look.
Do you believe what you said, that Putin can't remain in power? Or do you now regret saying that because your government has been trying to walk that back?
One, I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the more outrage I felt toward the way Putin is dealing and the actions of this man. Just brutality. Half the children in Ukraine. I just come from being with those families. It was expressing my outrage. He shouldn't remain in power. Just like, bad people shouldn't continue to do bad things. But it doesn't mean we have a fundamental policy to do anything to take Putin down in any way.
President Emmanuel Macron of France, a close U.S. ally who has spoken frequently with Putin since the invasion, warned the West not to escalate in words or actions or risk hampering vital humanitarian efforts, including hopes of evacuating the devastated city of Mariupol. Biden's remark, delivered in Warsaw at the close of a 3-day marathon diplomacy on Saturday, was seen as a gaffe by Republicans and some independent analysts concerned over a president going off script when dealing with such a combustible conflict. President Biden said he wasn't worried that it would ratchet up tensions with President Putin over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, adding that he was, quote, talking to the Russian people, telling them what they thought. And the bodies of 2 people were pulled from rubble on Tuesday following a Russian strike on a government building in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv, according to AFP journalists on the scene. Regional Governor Vitaly Kim said earlier that while most of the people inside the building had escaped injuries, 8 civilians and several Ukrainian military personnel were still unaccounted for. And the Kremlin on Tuesday denied the report that Chelsea Football Club owner Roman Abramovich was poisoned while taking part in peace talks over Ukraine, but confirmed he is acting as an intermediary. Now, this is part of information sabotage, part of an information war, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told journalists. He said it goes without saying that these reports do not correspond to reality. And here are some images of Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich listening to the opening speech made by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan before Russia and Ukraine have face-to-face talks at Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul today. Earlier, the Wall Street Journal reported, citing people familiar with the matter, that Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich and Ukrainian negotiators were targets of a suspected poison attack at peace talks earlier this month. Abramovich and the negotiators reportedly developed symptoms, including red eyes and peeling skin, though they later recovered. And today, Russia and Ukraine began their first face-to-face talks in weeks at Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul to try an end to the nearly 5-week-old war, which has killed an estimated 20,000 people. Welcoming the delegations, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said both parties have legitimate concerns and urges them to put an end to this tragedy. The whole world, he said, is waiting for good news from you. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has demanded the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, that it become a neutral country, and that Kiev recognize the breakaway Donbas region and Russian-annexed Crimea Peninsula as no longer part of Ukraine. Take a look.
Он сказал, что он никогда не отказывался от встреч с президентом Зеленским. Единственное, что он считает принципиально важным, чтобы эти встречи были хорошо подготовлены. Кризисная обстановка на Украине, конфликт внутриукраинский, он так долго вызревал все эти годы, что накопилось огромное количество проблем, поэтому просто встретиться и обменяться, вот что ты думаешь, а что я думаю, это сейчас просто будет контрпродуктивно. Чтобы Украина перестала быть страной, которую милитаризуют постоянно и пытаются там размещать ударное оружие, угрожающее Российской Федерации, чтобы на Украине прекратились усилия по поощрению неонацистской, нацистской идеологии, нацистской практики.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba said the talks will instead focus on easing the humanitarian situation. He says there is little room for agreement on Putin's territorial demands, saying we do not trade people, land, and sovereignty. And Russia said Tuesday it was expelling 10 diplomats from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia in a tit-for-tat move after the Baltic countries expelled Russian diplomats over military action in Ukraine. The foreign ministry said it summoned the ambassadors of the 3 EU and NATO member countries and strongly protested the unjustified expulsion of Russian diplomats. Now, these countries had expelled Russian diplomats earlier this month. In other news, more than 80% of Sudan's wheat imports are at risk after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. An aid group warns exacerbating economic and humanitarian crisis that deepened after last year's military takeover. Take a look.
And others. So if you look at Sudan, so already, the World Food Programme estimated that over 10 million people will be food insecure. Now they're re-estimating that in wake of drought and the Ukraine crisis, and increasing that by 65%. So now we're talking about almost 20 million people by the end of the year, or almost half the country being food insecure. Certain, you'll probably have to get the wheat from somewhere else, and therefore competition, and that's what anyone who is importing wheat from Russia and Ukraine, like Lebanon, like Egypt, like Jordan, they'll probably have to go elsewhere, to US, to Australia, to Europe and buy it, and then everybody's going to be bidding up the price.
Now, the Northeast African country was already reeling from international aid cuts and economic turmoil, which saw the local currency plummet, prices of food, fuel, and electricity skyrocket. Sudan, a country where a rise in bread prices sparked the turmoil and mass rallies that led to the 2019 ouster of veteran President Omar al-Bashir, has already seen a tenfold increase in bread prices in recent months. Now, the almost month-old Ukraine conflict has turned farmland there into battlefields and agricultural workers into soldiers, while freezing shipments abroad through port cities that have become combat zones. And spring has come to southwest Ukraine. Time for Alexander Petkov to start sowing his fields. But the war with Russia has had dire consequences for his ability to plant his crops, as well as for the wider world's food supply. Take a look.
Какие-то бравые охотники получились. Сильно да. Ставь. Организовываться группами. Вы видели блокпост на въезде в село. Это блокпост мы выложили своими силами. Ночью, каждую ночь здесь дежурит по 5-6 человек. Предприятия, плюс ребята, живущие в селе, выходят сюда. У кого есть оружие, выходят с оружием. Мы каждую ночь охраняем свой поселок. Каждую ночь. Оно хранится в специализированных складах, и мы, конечно, похороним это какой-то период, оно не испортится, но усугубляется все тем, что мы должны это реализовать для того, чтобы получить средства для дальнейшего производства. А мы, по сути, останавливаемся. Мы сейчас вырабатываем те остатки топлива, которые у нас были до войны, а новых поставок пока нет. И пока их еще не наладили. Вот мы находимся в фазе ожидания, но мы на самом юге работаем. У нас уже начинается посевная кампания. И вот тут мы сталкиваемся с проблемой, что нам через 3-5 дней нам нечем будет работать. У нас нет топлива. И нам его сюда никто не завозит.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba, sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Ay lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Paano makakaboto yun? May kapansanan nga.
Paano naman sa mga no read, no write? Hindi pa rin pwedeng bumoto.
Pwedeng bumoto! Ang mga illiterate o ang mga hindi marunong magbasa o magsulat, maging ang mga PWD, may karapatan silang bumoto.
Paano?
maaaring magdala ng mga kasama ang mga illiterate at PWD para maalalayan sila sa kanilang pagboto o sa mga pagkakataong kailangan nila ng tulong.
Kahit sino, pwede nilang isama?
No, dapat kamag-anak na kadugo ng botante ang kasama nila. Magdala lamang sila ng PWD ID. Ano bang kapansanan ng kakilala mo?
Ayun, nakahiga lang eh. Hindi makabangon. May sakit daw siyang love nut.
Hindi kapansanan yun. Alam ko na. Eto sa balutamol, balutromycin. Pakainin nyo para ganahan. Para sa karagdagang kaalaman, makipag-ugnayan lang sa pinakamalapit na barangay o bisitahin ang COMELEC website.
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council said today its contingency measures are well prepared for a possible prolonged unrest of the Taal volcano. Take a look.
Noong 2020 tapos 2021 nagkaroon na activities itong si Taal. Napaghandaan na po natin. Meron po tayong contingency plan for the Taal emergency at lahat po ng mga leksyon na natutunan natin doon sa nakaraang mga operations natin ay ina-apply po natin ngayon. Sabi po ng CBOX, babantayan po nila for close monitoring itong Taal for 2 weeks. Kaya po yung preparation po natin for supplies ay lagpas po for the 2-week arrangement na yan in case na magkaroon po ng extended stay.
Mr. Timbal said local government units affected by Taal volcano's ongoing magmatic unrest include those of Agoncillo, Balete, Cuenca, Laurel, Lemery, Talisay, and San Luis. He also assured the public that there are no more people on the Taal volcano island, while efforts are ongoing to convince residents in high-risk barangays to leave their homes. Mr. Timbal said members of the uniformed and law enforcement services, like the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Philippine National Police, Bureau of Fire Protection, and the Philippine Coast Guard, are always ready for deployment to assist them in evacuation activities. Meanwhile, people in Singapore no longer have to wear masks outdoors as the city-state eases a raft of COVID restrictions. Take a look.
Okay, it feels really liberating because, I mean, it's been like almost 2-3 years of the pandemic, right? Yeah, so I think being outdoors without a mask is something that I guess Singapore is working towards too, and I'm glad it's happening now.
The approach in Singapore has been very cautious, but certainly there are elements of it that are going to be make it a lot more pleasant here. I think being able to socialise in larger groups, the return of live music and of live broadcast of sport will be certainly very pleasurable.
You know, having our lungs are very happy because we can breathe in the fresh air once again.
While it was joy for many people, others decided to remain cautious and continue with the mask wearing. Singapore will also lift restrictions for all vaccinated travelers from April 1, with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong on Thursday hailing it as a major milestone in the aviation hub's efforts to live with COVID-19. Only travelers on a restricted list will face curbs in entering Singapore, although there are currently no countries on the list. Singapore's approach stands in contrast to rival financial hub Hong Kong, where arrivals are still required to undergo lengthy quarantines in hotels. Other countries in the Asia-Pacific that have recently announced an easing of travel restrictions include Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Meanwhile, residents in Shanghai are buying groceries from near-empty shelves after a run on supermarkets earlier in the day, as authorities now start a two-phase lockdown of the city of about 25 million people to carry out mass testing. The lockdown of Shanghai's sprawling eastern district known as Pudong will last until Friday. And then they will switch to the more populated western Puxi section, home to the historic Bund riverfront. Take a look. Meanwhile, police said Tuesday angry residents and police clashed for a third night in the suburbs north of Paris, leading to 13 arrests following the fatal shooting of a father of four by an officer at the weekend. Now, despite a heavy police presence to prevent further violence, several cars, a dozen bins, and an abandoned sports center were set alight overnight in the low-income suburbs. The unrest began Saturday after a police officer fatally shot the driver of a van that had been reported stolen and was being inspected at a traffic light in Sevran at around lunchtime. The officer was hospitalized afterwards in a state of shock, according to local prosecutor Ethik Mathai said Sunday, while internal police investigators have opened a probe into the incident. Residents in France's multiracial suburbs often complain about heavy-handed policing methods and violence that have led to a series of scandals in recent years. Police unions say officers often face hostility and attacks and are faced with the difficult task of trying to maintain order in impoverished high-rise housing estates that in some cases are centers of drug dealing and other criminality. In other news, a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry defended Beijing's sovereign rights and the right of jurisdiction over the relevant waters after the Philippine Coast Guard accused its Chinese counterpart of steering one of its ships within meters of a patrol vessel of the Philippines in the disputed South China Sea, breaking international rules and risking a collision. Take a look.
黄岩岛是中国的固有领土，中国对黄岩岛及其附近海域拥有主权，对相关海域拥有主权权利和管辖权。希望菲方船只切实尊重中方主权和权益，遵守中国的国内法和国际法，避免干扰影响中国海警在上述海域的巡航执法。
Now, the incident happened on March 2 near the contested Scarborough Shoal, one of the region's richest fishing grounds and a flashpoint between the two countries, but was only made public on Sunday. It was the fourth time in the past year that a Chinese Coast Guard vessel had conducted close-distance maneuvering near the shoal, according to the Philippine Coast Guard in a statement. China seized Scarborough from the Philippines in 2012 following a tense standoff. The Southeast Asian country continues to patrol the waters around the shoal, which is inside its exclusive economic zone. And finally, Iglesia Ni Cristo members successfully held a blood donation campaign with the Thai Red Cross. Our correspondent from Thailand, Faye Barte, reports from Bangkok.
Members of Iglesia Ni Cristo here in Bangkok, Thailand voluntarily donate blood in National Blood Center Thai Red Cross Society. The volunteers followed the procedures on how they can donate blood, such as vital signs checking, and they also followed health protocols to curb the spread of COVID-19.
My motivation, I would say, to come to today's event is to help those people in need. And donating blood is just one of the simplest ways that we could do to help save different lives. And I believe that that is also the objective and the goal of the church administration. And that is why we have activities such as this that is being held in the District of Thailand.
First of all, we thank the Lord God for utilizing the church administration and with the approval of the Executive Minister of the Church of Christ, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, the District of Thailand successfully conducted this blood donation activity.
This socio-civic activity of the Iglesia Ni Cristo members in Thailand is a proof that no matter where they are always united with the church administration in doing good to those who are in need. Reporting from Bangkok, Thailand, I am Faye Barta, and we live in interesting times.
Thanks, Faye. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angela. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in interesting times. Good night.